Welcome to the Average Joe Wrestling Show. I'm your host, Nick Latrenta, and today I'm here with Kevin Donatello. And so Kevin and I started this podcast, we're doing a video now, but we started it as a podcast. And as I was saying in my last videos, we're now doing like a more of a video format just for fun. A little disclaimer, I'm having trouble uploading an old podcast. So for the people who've been watching these videos, thank you very much. And I know the numbers are a little off because there's a podcast missing. I'm still trying to get that uploaded, so we will get to that. And so today, our topic is going to be something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, and I've talked about in past episodes, more specifically than what I've been talking about with just not liking two world titles, but we're going to specifically talk about the brand split, the pros and the cons. I've never liked it. I don't want to speak for you, Kevin, but I feel like you liked it at least more than I did.
Yeah.
So
I'm a fan.
You're a fan. Okay, so we'll debate that and we'll discuss that. So before we started recording, we had kind of a crazy time just trying to remember how all this went and how all this started. So what did we finally find out in terms of how this stuff all began?
So it really all began back when Vince had purchased WCW.
Yeah.
Back in March of 2001.
Right.
And then, so you had the invasion of WCW and ECW wrestlers. Kind of fighting off all the two other brands, if you will. And then on December, I think in December of 2001, it was the Vengeance pay-per-view. I think that's what it was called.
Yeah. So the feud between, they called it the Alliance. And WW, still WF at the time, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the feud was over. That ended at Survivor Series. But now they had the old WCW world title, and they had what was then the WWF world title. All right, and that brings us to Vengeance.
Correct. And then you had like a fatal four-way between Chris Jericho, Kurt Angle, The Rock
and Austin.
And Austin.
And actually, was it a four? I think it was like almost like a tournament, wasn't it?
Maybe it was.
It was like a tournament.
All four of those were involved.
They were the four main guys.
In some way, somehow. End of the night. It's 22 years later, so we can do a spoiler alert.
Yeah, I think you'll be okay.
Jericho ends up winning
and
becomes that first undisputed heavyweight champion
of the world, or whatever they called him at that point.
Yeah.
So at that point, all the way up until WrestleMania, Jericho was carrying two belts. He was carrying the old WCW world, we'll call it the big gold belt because that's what people commonly refer to, and I'll call it the Blue Eagle, the big blue WWF title with the eagle on it, which was symbolic for the Attitude Era. So I want to start there before we get to the brand split, because really, for me, this is all about the two world championships. And so I'm kind of an old school wrestling fan in many ways, where I like the modern stuff, but I do like a lot of the older tradition. And I personally think, as a fan, the championships are really important. Okay. And I know I've heard it said from people behind the scenes that they're just props and they're not a big deal. Look, I get that. I get that they're not real titles, so to speak. I get that it's not like, a boxing world championship or something like that. But, it's within the context of a fictional story. It's important, I think. And if you're trying to tell the fans that's important, you got to treat it importantly. So my first issue with all this, going back to when they unified the belts, I love that they unified the belts. I thought that was the coolest thing.
Yes.
Wow, I never thought I'd see this in my lifetime. They're unifying the WCW and WWF world titles, but they do it at a random pay-per-view.
Yes.
That always bothered me. Not at WrestleMania. You couldn't wait just a few months to WrestleMania?
Correct.
Yeah, did that ever bother you, or you're like, in hindsight, sure, but I didn't really care?
No, at the time, I didn't care.
Yeah.
I thought the tournament was cool.
Yeah.
Between those four wrestlers.
Yeah.
But you're right. At that point, looking back on it, you have 3 more months until WrestleMania. Yeah. That's not really going to hurt the bottom line.
Yeah.
At the end of it, so you could have waited till WrestleMania because, in all essence, that's when the quote-unquote wrestling season ends.
Yeah.
And then the new season
exactly
picks up that next Monday on Raw. So, it makes sense to me I would have waited to WrestleMania.
Yeah, so I don't understand why they didn't do that. I do get I guess the mindset might have originally been, oh, we don't want 2 world titles running around. Look where that got them, because eventually that became the thing to do. But yeah, I never liked that. It was just kind of thrown away at some random pay-per-view. That was my thing. But I was glad they unified the belts. I wasn't glad that when Jericho won the belts, he had to carry both things around. Right. I've never been a fan of that. I know visually it looks kind of cool, and we discussed this probably in I think the first podcast when we reviewed, might have been SummerSlam way back, about Roman Reigns carrying around all the belts. I get visually it looks cool, but I never liked it. And also to me, it was like, well, if you really care, you're going to make one new beautiful championship. And Jericho didn't get that. He had to carry around these 2 belts that were, huge at the time. And he never got one belt out of it because he held those belts all the way to WrestleMania 18. And then Triple H beats him. And the next night, Triple H gets what they wind up calling the Undisputed Championship, right? Correct. Which is, did you like that belt? I always liked that belt.
I forget the design of it, to be
black
honest.
Background, like.
Yeah.
A little bit. It looked a little like the Intercontinental.
Correct. Belt. Yeah, I liked it. I liked the fact that it was one belt.
Yeah.
Just like you, I didn't understand the point of carrying 2.
Yeah.
Aesthetically fine.
Yeah.
But no, give the one belt at this point. You're one company now. You're not a WCW company with that big gold belt that you alluded to.
Yeah.
And you're not, just make it one belt for one company.
Yeah. So anyway, they unify the belts. The whole alliance thing is over. We should definitely do another episode about the alliance. Feud, because that's interesting. You said you liked it. I know this isn't a popular opinion, but I actually liked it too. Yeah. It could have been way better than it was, but I enjoyed it at the time also.
Yes.
But we'll do another episode with that. So, okay, for a while they're doing the Undisputed Championship. Triple H holds it. Hogan holds it when he comes back for a while. Undertaker holds it. The Rock holds it. And then eventually we get, I think after The Rock was actually Brock Lesnar. And by the time we get to the brand split, Brock Lesnar's holding this belt. But let's actually backtrack a little bit. So this is quite some time after the whole alliance angle, probably almost a year, I think.
Yeah, the alliance, well, the purchase happened, I think, right before WrestleMania.
Right before WrestleMania 17.
Correct,
yeah.
Right before WrestleMania.
That's when the 17. Purchase happened. And then the feud, the alliance angle started, in the summer, I think, of that year?
Somewhere, maybe even before the summer, but somewhere roughly after WrestleMania.
So what was, you looked this up and I completely forgot about this. What was the original plan that you found out?
So the original plan was to have WCW be on Monday nights.
Yeah.
And then have the WWF at that time be on SmackDown, whatever night that was, Thursday or Friday. They switched between days.
Yeah. That's another thing we'll talk about.
Yeah, but it was keep WCW on Monday nights, WWF on Thursday nights, Friday nights for SmackDown. And then that was it. And just kind of do the 2 separate shows.
Yeah. Now, I just to clarify a little bit, at this point, the WWF had bought WCW. So we're not talking about like the Turner WCW. We're talking about Vince McMahon WCW.
It would be, the design was to have all the WCW wrestlers
on one show.
Be on Monday night.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of separate the rosters, if you will, and do it like that. But you're right, it was a WWF owned WCW.
Okay, so that was the original plan. They wound up not doing that clearly. I had heard it was because they tried one WCW. I don't know if you remember this. There was one WCW Nitro they tried during the alliance angle, and Buff Bagwell and Booker T headlined it, and the match did not go well, and that's why they scrapped the whole thing.
Who headlined it?
Booker T and Buff Bagwell.
Nothing against Booker T, but Buff Bagwell is probably the reason why it didn't work.
No offense to him, but
and then I read that the invasion angle, fizzled out the way it did, and that was another reason why.
They didn't
do the WCW.
Yeah. But to give or take a year later, Vince McMahon decides to do this, and I recall vaguely. Now, keep in mind, we're getting a lot of stuff from our big thing was WrestleZone. We always read WrestleZone, and being older now, I take a lot of what I hear, what I read online with a grain of salt. But what I recall at the time. And there is logic behind this. Think about it. By that point, WWF had bought WCW and ECW. and graciously took a lot of those wrestlers under their wing.
Yes.
So now you have a huge swell in your roster. So I think the logic behind it was, why don't we make our two separate shows almost like two separate companies, and have certain superstars on Raw and certain superstars on SmackDown. Now, just to backtrack a little bit, I don't think it would have been a good idea to put WCW on Monday nights.
No.
Like, why would you give them Raw, the flagship show? I think SmackDown would have been better, but at this point, they're not doing a WCW WWF thing. They're going to do a Raw and a SmackDown thing. So this has been going on for a while. I remember back in the day reading about this and never liking the idea. And this was before they were, I had any idea that they were going to do two world titles. What did you think of the idea when you first started hearing about it?
About a brand split?
About a brand split. Before it happened.
I thought it was a good idea.
You thought, why did you think it was a good
Because just
idea?
like you said, with the swell of wrestlers from ECW, which had happened before the purchase of WCW, and then you have WCW, but then keep in mind, you had all the WCW big names who were still under contract for a year or so after the purchase that still didn't make their way to the company, like Hall, like Nash, like Sting, who doesn't come until
much
15 years later.
Yeah.
But wrestlers like that who were just still getting paid to sit at home. But also, you want your stories to develop and to breathe. You don't want anything rushed. So by having the brand split, you were able to do that, as opposed to having the same dozen wrestlers appear on Raw and the same dozen appear on SmackDown. Because they didn't have all those guys in the locker room doing nothing or having quick squash matches.
Okay.
It just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, so it's a little hard for me to articulate why I've never liked it, with the exception of when the titles split. So I guess I'll bring that. I just remember not liking the idea and kind of thinking, well, why can't you just primarily have wrestlers on one show and another show and just occasionally switch them out, not say they're exclusive to this show? But that's probably my old school thinking. A lot of people like the brand split idea, and I remember they centered it all around Ric Flair at the time.
It was Ric Flair who was running, I think, Raw.
Yeah.
And then Vince running SmackDown.
Yeah.
Which still doesn't make sense to me, but whatever.
It
happened. And that's how it really became because they would have their own draft of who wanted which superstars and all of that.
Right. So, okay, they do the brand split.
Yes.
I remember. What do you have any memories of the night they did the whole thing where they picked the names and showed where they were drafting and all that stuff?
Just from watching clips.
Yeah.
But no, I don't remember that. That specific night from 20-something years ago. But I just remember seeing it.
Yeah. I remember it vaguely. It was a long time. It was a cool episode to watch. I'll give it that. So they split the shows, and Brock Lesnar is the only world champion in WWF at that point. And I don't recall how long this went on, but I don't think it was long. He was the champion, but he was on both shows. And I think the rule was, if you're the champion, you're going to be on both shows. And that might have been the rule for the other titles, too. I don't think they did the two tag team titles and the U.S. title and all that right away. I don't think they did.
The two separate tag team titles is very recent.
Yeah.
With the last handful of years, very recent. So I think it was, Intercontinental Champion, Heavyweight Champion. You could be on both.
Yeah. I remember actually they unified the Intercontinental belt for a while. Do you remember that?
No.
Well, you know what? We'll get to that in a second. So first, we have to get to them creating another title. So eventually, and I remember this Raw very well. I remember Lesnar and Heyman in a backstage segment, Heyman being interviewed by someone saying, I'm taking my client and his title exclusively to SmackDown. And then, if I remember right, the following Raw, by that point, Eric Bischoff was in WWF. We'll backtrack a little bit. We were there.
Yes.
The night. We were in, it was then the Continental Airlines Arena. And is that arena still around?
Yeah, it is.
What's it called now? I forget.
It's the Izod Center.
It's still Izod, okay.
Nothing goes on there because the American Dream Mall is there. They use it maybe for like concert setups.
Okay.
But no sports, no wrestling. But you mentioned that night. That, for me, that was a very anticlimactic return for Eric Bischoff because they show him getting out of the limo backstage.
Yeah. And didn't you see Booker T on the
And you see Booker T because
yeah.
he was being interviewed.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you see the limo pull up. You see Bischoff get out. And it's not that it died there.
Yeah, but
it took a lot of the air out.
I agree. I never liked that.
Because I always thought that he should have been introduced or shown for the first time in front of that live crowd, walking through the curtain, down the ramp. I thought that would have been something.
Yeah,
but it does go with Bischoff, too.
Yeah, I remember that very well. And I remember thinking the same thing that took the air out of it. That was the same night they disbanded the NWO, so they were I
don't remember that.
You remember that Vince came out to the NWO music and he said that's the last time you're gonna hear this music. I think that's when Hall was fired and Nash was already injured. So like the NWO had basically Michaels was like not wrestling, but he was in the NWO. You remember that?
I remember
so
that.
Like they were like, at this point, forget it. We're
I have to go back and watch. I don't. That's like the only thing I remember is Bischoff coming back. That was it.
But it was weird, I gotta say, because I started watching regularly in late 1995. You probably were watching before me at that point.
I remember 96. Early 96. Early 96.
That was like the height of the Monday Night Wars. Yes. We were like in the trenches, so to speak, watching it, and with 1998 and 99. So to be there tonight and see McMahon hold Bischoff hugging my meat, it was so weird. Yes. But I agree. I just wish they didn't have the backstage thing and he just came out. It would have been so much more of a shock.
Also shows you what kind of businessman Vince was or is that no, like this is good for business.
Yeah.
Kind of bury the hatchet in a way and let's move on.
Yeah. So anyway, Bischoff is around at this point and Bischoff winds up running Raw. I remember that. Because when Lesnar goes to SmackDown with the WWE Undisputed Championship, which I'm pretty sure that's what they were calling it at this point, I remember this very well. Bischoff comes out on Raw with a suitcase and Triple H and says, if SmackDown is going to have a world championship, why can't Raw? He opens the suitcase and there it is, the big gold belt. And he just gives it to Triple H. I remember that bothered me so much too. That was actually very good writing that they did that because that's a real heel thing to do, not earn it.
Correct.
But I remember being so mad. He should fight for that championship. So then, the 2 world titles, and I hated it from day one.
You did?
Absolutely hated it.
What bothers you more, Nick? The 2 world titles or the height of the wrestlers not being accurate? Not being accurate, yeah.
That's a tough one. I want to do a whole episode one day on just heights of wrestlers, including this guy right here, Andre the Giant, who I'm representing today. I don't know. That's a tough one. That's a tough one. Probably the belts more.
All right,
wow. More, I'm going to say. But I just think, I look at it, now I understand we're talking a fictional story as opposed to real life, but like, you have one Best Actor Oscar, one Best Actress Oscar, one main, I'm using actor comparisons, main Emmys, main music, Grammys, things like that.
Correct.
There's usually, and it might be, split a little bit, but like usually there's one big thing. There's
Best Picture.
Best Picture, right? You don't have 20 categories for Best Picture. You have one Best Picture. Sports, you have one Super Bowl championship. Yes. You have one World Series championship and all that. I hated that there were 2 world titles. Yes. To me, that ended an era where you had a top guy. Yes. Then, to me, it's like, then who's the top guy? What I never understood was the Intercontinental title was always such a big title in the WWF.
It was a stepping stone.
So I always thought, why not just make Raw all about the Intercontinental title? But then I guess it wouldn't be as, on par with SmackDown. But that's why it bothers me to this day.
You dilute your product.
Yeah, exactly.
By saying, no, we have 2 champions. Now, I understand the business side of it.
Yeah.
That you have to give your networks, even if they're sharing Raw and SmackDown the same television network, you have to give them the network a reason for fans to tune in. Because if you're only having your championship tune in on SmackDown, what's the point of watching Raw?
Right.
So from that business or financial aspect, I understand it.
Yeah.
the fan.
Mhm.
I'm not
You're not a fan of that either.
No.
Okay, so you like the brand split.
I do like
but you
the
don't
brand
really
split.
like the two belts.
No.
Okay.
I don't. I get it. I
Yeah.
could live
Okay.
with it.
Yeah.
I don't hate
That's
it.
a difference.
I don't hate it as much as you do.
I can't live with it. I don't like it.
No, but because if you really think about it too, if you have that one champion who's on SmackDown,
Right.
and then whose turn is it to challenge? Is it Raw's
Right.
turn or SmackDown's turn? So I could live with it.
Yeah.
I just think you are diluting your product.
Right. Now, here's the thing with me, and this is where it gets a little weird with me, admittedly. If it was WCW on one show and WWF on another show, even though all owned by WWF, I would like it better because it'd give the illusion that it's two different companies. Like when eventually they created ECW, not created ECW, excuse me.
They brought ECW
back and made another brand out of it, which didn't work well, but that didn't bother me because they were touting as another company.
Correct.
But what they were doing here is they weren't touting another company, they were just touting two different shows. Now, could have worked, and it worked for a while if they were strict with it being two different shows. This is where it starts getting to be an issue. So going back to the Intercontinental title, I remember at one point Kane losing the Intercontinental title, I want to say to Triple H. It might have been the night that Kane took off his mask. And Triple H unified it with the world title. I remember thinking, no, you're getting rid of the Intercontinental title now? What's wrong with you people? But finally, they wound up bringing it back. So that was just a story I wanted to get to real quick. But
hold on, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier.
Yeah.
About high school and how it's 20 years for us.
Yeah.
The night Kane took off his mask was
yes.
the night we graduated high school.
I remember I was so mad because it shows how old we are. I forgot to set my VCR. I was so mad.
You didn't say DVR.
No,
VCR.
not DVR. VCR. Kiddos, this is when you put something like a box into a machine and recorded television on a tape. So I remember saying, because we did like a surprise graduation thing for our school.
Yep.
And I remember saying to you guys, like, do you think they're going to take us to Madison Square Garden to watch Raw? And you guys were like, no, Nick, they're not taking us to Madison Square Garden to watch Raw. You're crazy. So
I forgot about that.
Yeah, you're right. I was so mad because I wanted to see Kane without the mask, and I wound up seeing it like a day later. I was just mad I didn't record it.
And you couldn't go on streaming services.
Yeah,
back then
or
or
we didn't have that. That's if we wanted to do something like this back then. I don't even know if YouTube was around back then.
No.
Was YouTube around? I don't think it was.
I don't know.
We would have had to record this on a tape and like mail it somewhere, I guess, to get played. But,
podcasts were not a thing.
Yeah, they were not a thing.
Yeah,
no. So, wow.
That was just
I
we were talking about
a
reunion of some sorts.
Yeah.
So that was. I think you're right. I think he did lose.
Yeah, it might have been the IC belt that night too. Yeah, but for a while they were doing a pretty good job of keeping the characters on their respective shows. And whenever they had an interpromotional match, there was always some. Like, I remember, this would have been a couple years later, they had Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle at WrestleMania, and they were on different shows. But they would fight at the Royal Rumble, and that's how the feud started, and they found kind of clever ways to feud, but kept them off of each other's shows. But it didn't take long for them to stop doing that. Right?
So I think we also have to go back to the draft.
Right.
As well, when we talk about the brand splits. And the one thing I remember reading and hearing about, because they would do a draft annually,
right,
of what wrestlers go to SmackDown, which goes to Raw. Was that some wrestlers truly didn't know where they would be ending up.
Commentators
until
too
that night. Yes.
Yeah.
But that was the one thing with the brand extent or the brand split.
Yeah.
That bothered me was when they would do the draft. Is that because Raw was a 3-hour show, they would get 2 picks for every SmackDown, 1 pick.
Yeah.
To me, that.
And you're trying to say they're equal shows?
But no, they were basing it off of hours.
Right.
It just didn't make sense to me at all.
Agreed.
You're trying to now really put one brand over the other brands.
Yeah. Raw, and I say this with all due respect to SmackDown, Raw will always be the show.
I don't think anymore.
You don't think so?
I don't
really?
think anymore.
You think SmackDown's a better show? Wow.
I do.
Wow.
I do. I think because of how generationally people consume content,
Yeah.
people's attention spans, mine included,
Huh.
SmackDown being the shorter show,
Yeah.
there's more action happening.
Okay.
At the same time, you have Roman Reigns
Right.
on SmackDown, who, whether you like it or not, he doesn't defend the title every week.
Yeah, which I like, actually. I do like
But
that.
he's been holding it for over 1,000 days.
Yeah.
I think it's the more...
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's taken over Raw as a flagship show.
Yeah.
Because Raw will always be flagship.
Yeah.
But I think if you had to rank them, I think a lot more people now would put SmackDown ahead of Raw.
Interesting.
2 hours versus 3.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. 3 hours is a long time.
A long time to fill, correct.
Yeah.
More wrestling rather than, backstage segments, interviews, that type of thing. So I just think because of that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that Raw still wouldn't beat out SmackDown.
Yeah.
I just think it's closing the gap a lot more.
Yeah, yeah.
Than it would have 10 years ago, 12 years ago.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So, all right. So we have these two shows, and by this point, both shows are having their separate titles. I think the U.S. title's around. So they're really trying to promote it as like two different companies. Remember, for a while, too, they were having separate pay-per-views, with the exception of like the big pay-per-views. So like SummerSlam or Survivor Series, Rumble, WrestleMania, they would have both promotions on. But the ones in between, they would alternate for a while.
Yes.
They did. I want to say they only did it like a year, where like there would be a SmackDown pay-per-view and a Raw pay-per-view. Yeah.
No, it was dumb.
It was dumb.
It was dumb.
Now, listen, in theory, if you're going to have two separate companies, sure, I get it, but
correct.
It didn't work.
No.
It did not work.
And then you were also asking, right? So I am not a business person by any stretch of the imagination. But then you're asking your fan base, right? If you did a Raw pay-per-view and a SmackDown pay-per-view in the same month, which I think happened.
I think it overlapped once in a while.
You're asking your fan base to now pay out, $40 a month, $50, whatever it happened to be, to watch two products that were probably substandard.
Yeah.
Just because they were trying to rush everything.
Right. And this is well before the WWE Network and WWE on Peacock and all that. Like, this was, when you had to buy a pay-per-view, which could be easily $35, $40. WrestleMania was like $50
depending on the bigger premium ones. Correct.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, so let's fast forward. So basically, over time, the brand split. You'd have SmackDown guys on Raw guys on SmackDown, the world champion on Raw, the world champion on SmackDown. I remember I used to ask, like, Alberto Del Rio is world champion. Which show is he on?
Correct.
Like, because it would be going back and forth. And I remember the world title, they were really starting to dilute too, because they was losing all these non-title matches.
Yes.
So it got to a point where they never officially announced it, but the brand split kind of stopped. People were just, over the course of the 10 years, it was just doing its own thing. It made no sense. So finally, they decide to unify the belts. So I remember Triple H in an interview saying, we're going to start a new year, one world champion. Yep. We might have to wrap this up soon because I can hear my son crying up there. And they have a title unification match. I remember I was so excited. Randy Orton wins. Now he's carrying around two belts. They couldn't make just one belt.
And again, that was at a December pay-per-view.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a TLC.
Yeah.
Why not wait the 3 months
for WrestleMania?
It's a big deal. Discussed earlier.
Now, at least they had the whole Daniel Bryan thing going on, because then he wound up winning, and that was great. And again, he was carrying around two belts for the longest time. I can't remember now who beat him. I think it was Lesnar beat him, and they brought back just one belt. So, for a while, great. We just have one champion, and then it happens again. That's it.
It's all cyclical.
It all comes back. When was it 2016? You said I don't even remember.
So the first brand split was from 2002 to 2011, and then it stopped because worlds were colliding. And then it picked up again 2016, and it's something we're still in today, 7 years later.
And what they did, which was interesting with it, was they did the two world titles for a while. Then at one point, Lesnar won. I don't even know which is which anymore. Won one of them, and Reigns had the other one. Reigns beats Lesnar for it.
WrestleMania 30.
Yeah. There you go. And then
to become
3
the
years.
undisputed whatever title, whatever name they came up with, but that was combining it.
Yeah, so then they kept the brand split with one world champion for the longest time. And they had the 2 belts for the longest time. I remember we talked about that in the first podcast. It drove me crazy.
And then, like, on Reigns' 1,000th day of being it, or maybe a little over 1,000, that's where they give him, or that's where he presented himself with that one belt.
Yeah. And then he goes to SmackDown. And then Raw starts all over again. And Rollins winds up becoming, I don't even know what do they call him? The world champion? The world undisputed?
They call it, I read it. The name was the Universal Champion.
Universal Champion.
The WWE Universal Champion. Yeah. Reigns is the heavyweight champion.
Okay.
But that was, I don't want to say gifted to him. I think did
it kind of did. For it? Reigns or Rollins?
No, Rollins.
No, Rollins I think won a tournament.
Okay, he won a tournament, and that was given to him in like June of 2023.
Right.
And now what really is happening is you have 2 champions.
Yep.
One on Raw, one on SmackDown.
And what's interesting, real quick, the Rollins belt, I'll call it, it's basically the big gold belt redesigned, a little bit smaller with the WWE logo in the middle.
Correct.
It's a nice belt. I like it. I think the WWE part of it is too big, but so now we got these 2 things again. So here we are. Now, I'm considering myself more of a classic wrestling fan nowadays. I haven't watched a modern product in quite a while. I did watch a little bit of Crown Jewel, which was good, but
it's going to be interesting, Nick. I'm sorry. Because in 11 months from now, and we did not talk about this, but Fox is losing the rights to SmackDown.
I didn't know that, really.
Yeah, their 5-year deal is up in October 2024.
Really?
Because they had started October 2019, and then on that first SmackDown, Brock Lesnar just destroys Kofi Kingston.
Right, yeah.
And then the whole pandemic thing happens.
Right.
So 5 years, it was a 5-year deal. From my understanding, Fox did negotiate, but USA came up with a better deal. So Raw and SmackDown, starting October of 2024, will be on USA.
Both will be
on USA. So it will be very So USA is going to have Raw, NXT, and SmackDown.
So is it really necessary to have 2 world belts?
Well,
then,
that's why it's going to be interesting to see what happens in 11 months. And we do come up with a WrestleMania in a few months, where rumor is it's going to be Cody versus Roman again.
Yeah, maybe this time to unify the belts again.
And then, well, you think about it too, Rollins and Cody, although they finished their feud a few months ago, they could still have unfinished business.
Yeah, absolutely. And they had great chemistry together.
So now, if now we're getting way ahead of ourselves. Yeah. But if Cody wins WrestleMania, him and Rollins could have a fight, and now you have all the belts really to one person, and you could have a unification of one belt.
I'm hoping.
It's a little bit of a wormhole I've been going down.
No, but it makes sense. That's really the reason why they were doing it. There's 2 different networks. So what do you guys think? I think we'll wrap that up here. Any final thoughts or like?
It's been a long road with these brand extensions and all of that, but
even researching it, we were like, our brains were like, what? This happened? I don't remember that.
It's a good thing we researched, because I don't think we would have been able to have all of the facts just from our memories.
Yeah.
But it's been one crazy road.
It has been a crazy road. So thank you for watching. If you stuck with us for the last 34 minutes or so here, like, comment, subscribe, and thank you again.